from the crypt.
Hello, boils and ghouls. Welcome to a very special interview episode of Dads from the Crypt. My name is Jason. And today, we're doing a deep dive into a horror classic as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of George A. Romero's classic, Day of the Dead. I've got an amazing lineup of guests who are right there in the trenches. First, we have Mr. John Harrison, the man behind the chilling score and the first assistant director. The one, the only Greg Nicotero, the true guru of zombie makeup, and who was also featured in the film. And last, but certainly not least, we have producer Ed Lammi. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, hello.
All right, first, can you guys believe it's been 40 years since that mine?
Hard to believe.
Make us feel old.
Yeah, really. I think I
know.
still have some gunk in my lungs from the limestone caves. I'm sure that's probably all of us suffer.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, I'm still blowing my nose and it comes out black.
Well, that was the weird thing is that we would go to work and it would be dark, and then we would come out and it would still be dark. So for like 3 months, we never saw the sun because in the cave, it was always 58 degrees,
Something like that. Yeah, in the low 50s.
temperature.
Now, is it true that they went around and give everyone B12 shots?
I think there was a time when I believe his name was Dr. Feelgood.
Oh, God.
Everybody got sick. Everybody got sick because, as Greg points out,
I don't remember any B12 shots. I just remember us stealing all the golf carts and driving way down into the mine.
Well, there's
because
that.
this place is still there. It's still there in Pittsburgh, in Wampum, PA, and they used to store RVs and boats and stuff in there. So, and if you went deep enough, it was like pitch black. There'd be bats everywhere, and so I think some of the fun for us would be to steal the golf carts and drive as far into the mine as you could get, and hopefully be able to get back. Because
we took a tour with the mine manager in a van, and we drove in because he wanted to show us there's a lagoon back there, like 25-acre lagoon or something like that.
Oh my God!
When we got to that point and he turned off the truck, I mean, you were blind. There was absolutely, you couldn't see anything, and I thought, that's probably where Jimmy Hoffa is buried.
You know what else they store in there? They store old prints of movies. All the Hollywood studios would store all the old prints from that had been circulated to all the theaters.
Yeah.
And negatives.
Because of the climate control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shit, we should have had movie night. Why did we? I'm surprised George wasn't back there looking for a copy of Tales from Hoffman or something.
Well, the funny part is when we were editing it, we would get what they used to call fill. For the people who don't know about editing analog anymore, because it's all digital, we used to actually have 35 millimeter film, and you had to populate the plates of the turntables with areas that weren't actually the movie. They were just holding the soundtrack in its right place. And we used to go through those, and you'd be amazed at the films, because that's what they would send us. They would send us all the work prints and old prints of movies, and we'd have like tons of old movies that we were using as fill for the editing.
All right, now, Ed, let's start with you. Take us to the beginning when Romero was, planning on a sequel to Dawn, the highly successful, influential movie. What was his original vision for this sequel?
So, if I can, real quick, I was thinking about this morning. So, I met Richard Rubenstein through John, and he was looking for a line producer for the movie. And I think I met him in the spring, like around now, May, something like that. He was out here. We met, and then he called me up and he said, "Hey, get on a plane, come to New York." And, being a TV guy, I said, "It's like June and you don't shoot till October. It's way too early for me." And he said, no, just read the script, come to New York. So, and in those conversations, he said, because of the distribution deal with the distributor, he said, I got about $3.25 million to make the movie. So I got on the plane and I read the script. And when I landed in New York, I said, now I know why I'm here. This is a $10 million script you sent me. And he said, yeah, that's the problem. We've got to get it down to $3.25 million. So all summer in the offices downtown Pittsburgh, it was myself, it was George, it was Zilla Clinton, who was our production manager, old friend of ours, Michael Gornick. And at some point, John, you came in, and sometime you did, Greg, I don't remember exactly when, but I spent the summer rebudgeting and George spent the summer rewriting. So he had a much bigger scope in mind when he started it. But it just, the finances just weren't going to support it. And another quick aside, if I may, at one point, George sort of said, I'm done. I can't cut this anymore. Let's go talk to Sala. That was the distributor, and see if we can get more money. And I was like a kid. So this was like a Hollywood movie for me. We got on an airplane. We flew to Tampa, Florida, I think. I went to this big fancy restaurant and we met with the distributor, Sala. And the first thing he said to George is, he said, George, can you give me an R-rated movie? And George said, no, my fans would have abandoned me. I always do my movies unrated. And so I said, then I got $3.25 million. And we were at 3.6 and we discussed it and he accepted 3.6 and we came back to Pittsburgh and we moved forward in that price range for the movie. But yeah, that was how it started. And George had obviously written it well before I even got there. But when Richard gave me the script, I went, I see the dilemma. It's a much, much bigger script than the budget's going to allow.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of that ended up in Land of the Dead, I think. Some of the bigger, the Gretna Green and, or not Gretna Green, but what do we call it? Yes, exactly. Fiddler's Green.
Fiddler's Green.
And so a lot of the tropes that were in the original script ended up in Land.
The other thing,
and interestingly enough, too, when I started, because I got hired by Savini mid-July, like July 23rd. And we were still going off of the original draft, which I happen to have, right?
Wow.
Look, so there's my original script. It still says 247 Fort Pitt Boulevard on it, which was where the offices were. So we spent the first month prepping the original script because I did all the breakdowns for Savini. And it started with this big shootout on the pier, and then they get on a boat and they go out to the island where Gasparilla was, and a lot of that stuff. So for me, I spent a month working on the original. It's kind of funny. I think at one point I did an interview years ago and called it the 10 Commandments of zombie movies. And that stuck. Like if you look up Wikipedia Day of the Dead, it'll call it the 10 Commandments of zombie movies. It was so sprawling and so epic. And I really, really fell in love with the first draft of the script. So much so that I remember, guys, when we went to Sanibel Island to shoot in December, we weren't taking, the gun guy didn't come with us. We didn't have any guns and we weren't taking anything because there was no shootout anymore. Right. And I remember I was 20 years old begging George, like, can we please just have one shootout? Please, can we just shoot some zombies? Because I held out hope. And I think he loved that about me he's like, nah, dude, we just don't have the $8 million that we needed. So I remember the hardest thing for me about Day of the Dead was because I was married to the big original draft for a long time.
Yeah.
I always, and this is scandalous to say, but I always look at the version of Day of the Dead that everybody knows as the Reader's Digest version of what George had always wanted to do. And it's hard for me because people come up to me and say, oh my God, Day of the Dead's my favorite movie. It's my favorite movie. And I'm like, you should have fucking seen the movie that he wanted to make, you know? It kind of, you know.
I mean, I'm sure,
you know.
I'm sure that version would have been amazing, but I think one of the reasons why the fans love it because it is a bit smaller and more claustrophobic and encapsulated. Yeah. So it might not have been that amazing movie that you were promised, but it came out to be, a fan favorite.
Agreed, for sure.
Special on its own merits.
Can
you guys talk about?
George wanted to shoot it all in Florida because he had that home in Sanibel.
Yeah.
But of course, it has this big underground facility. And I said, George, you dig down 3 feet in Florida and you hit water. We can't do that here. And then somewhere along the line, I think it may have been, I remember going out to scout the mine, but I think maybe Gornick found the mine before I got there. I think
Probably
mine,
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was already in the picture when I got there, but and I don't know if you've seen the footage in the movie, but it's most amazing. It's a set you could never afford to build,
Right.
But it's just there in nature.
Now, can you guys talk a little bit about like plot wise what the original scope or plan was, or was it relatively similar but bigger scale?
Well, it was bigger. I mean, it really revolved around this island, not island, but this compound of people, rich people that were able to live separated from the rest of the zombies.
But it was on an island. It was on an island.
Yeah, it was on an island. And because water apparently would keep the zombies away. And so George, having his commentary, his social commentary throughout all of these things, had a lot to say about what would happen to a community of human beings that were isolated on this island. So there was a lot of the internal politics of what was going on among them, and the people who were authoritarian and the people who wanted to be more liberal, if you will. And so it was a much bigger scope. And I forget, Greg, in the original script, how much of the army, central the army was to except for being sort of the bodyguards for all the keeping order in Fiddler's Green. But I forget some of that.
Yeah, like Gasparilla, who was the main bad guy in George's movie. They were training, they were doing the thing that we ended up doing with Logan and Bub, which was they were trying to train zombies to be soldiers by feeding them human flesh. So that was the original idea. I think what I always loved about the original script was there was this whole underground revolutionary faction that was determined to take down Gasparilla and his wealthier people by infiltrating the compound. And then at the very end, of course, everything, there's a big attack with the guerrillas attacking the compound. And one of the coolest things that George ever wrote was there was a character named Nitro. It was very Mad Max. There was a lot of Mad Max elements.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
In the movie, there was a character named Nitro. And the way that they were going to blow up the complex was they made incisions in this woman's skin and slid vials of nitroglycerin underneath her skin and then snuck her into the compound. But then when the zombies, of course, attack and all hell breaks loose, I'll never forget, there's a gag where one of the zombies grabs her and bites her and comes back with a vial of nitroglycerin in its mouth. And the zombie just kind of goes like this and drops it, and then the whole place explodes. It's so fucking great. It was so great. I'm looking for it in the script because I have the script. That was like literally one of my favorite bits in the movie.
And the script's also like 300 pages long, right?
It's 154.
Yeah.
Greg, you ever thought about doing like a dramatic reading?
No, but look, I've talked to the rights owners about about making the script as it was written now.
Wow.
About going back and making George's original script, and they seem very keen on it. All right, so wait, hold on. I'm going to do a dramatic reading for one second. Here we go. Okay. So this is Bub. Now Bub is shooting everybody in the main chamber. A zombie takes a bite out of Spider's shoulder. Spider was the character. Pulls out a big chunk of flesh, and with it stuck in the zombie's teeth comes a vial of nitro. Several creatures are pulling at the woman. She's still reaching for the powder magazine doors, but the zombies are pulling her away. Creature with the test tube in its mouth, a blue coat, pulls the thing out from between its teeth, throws the thing angrily towards Spider, towards the magazine door, and kabloom. And if you ever know the way George writes it, kabloom literally goes all the way across the page. George would write like if you were shooting a machine gun, it would be rat tat 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 tat, and he would type it up. One of my favorite things. So I love that. I love that original script. It's so great. Not that I don't love the movie, but you know.
Do you ever borrow any of it for Walking Dead?
No, you know, we always did our tribute zombies. We did a Bub tribute zombie, and we did Don. Yeah, we've done tons of them, but I never wanted to borrow anything from that script actually, because it's too good.
Except you guys were true to the zombie, you know, myth or whatever. Like, you know, some of those other movies where the zombies are racing across the yards, like zombies don't do that. They don't move like that. You were true to all that.
Well, that's all a result of video games. And 28 days later, I think 28 days later, and you know, because I remember, John, last year we did a screening at the Egyptian Theater. And we were all there. I think, Ed, you probably were there too.
Yeah, this was for the soundtrack album, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And George, we were sitting on stage doing a Q&A afterwards, and George was talking about zombie movies and stuff, and he said a really great quote. He said, "You know, for a long time, I was the only kid in the sandbox." And he's like, "Now everybody's in my fucking sandbox, kicking sand all over my shit," and you know, whatever. It was kind of funny. But the truth of the matter is, you know, I always equate the current advancement or popularity of zombie movies to video games, because when Resident Evil and House of the Dead came out, I personally believe that opened the door to the genre by having young people have plastic guns in their hands, being able to shoot zombies. Mm-hmm. And I really do believe that between that, which was like in the early 2000s, late 80s, and then when 28 Days Later came out in 92 or 93, no, 2002, 2000.
No, that was like 2004, I think.
It came out in 2000, yeah, right around March of 2004. But I think that time period of when the video games started gaining popularity and then that movie came out, I always feel like that's what really catapulted the zombie genre kind of into the mainstream, like it had never been before, by the way, because video games didn't exist when Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead and Dawn of the Dead came out. So I remember George saying, "Yeah, I was the only kid in the sandbox for a long time." And I just said, "Look, the minute that you put a toy gun in somebody's hand and they can shoot zombies and their lives are fully dependent on them being good at shooting zombies, that I think changed the rules."
Yeah.
So John, I want to get back to you for a minute. So you obviously, what were your responsibilities as first AD? What did George have you doing?
Well, basically, I was just there to be his pal.
I mean, you ran the set.
I mean, I did the same duties on Creep Show, but it was really a goof in a way, because Richard called me up one day and said, "Hey, look, George is not happy with the two ADs that we've had. They were regular DGA ADs, and I did not have any of that training. My training was theater background, and I had a small film production company, and I directed rock videos and things like that." And I said, "Richard, I don't know how to do this." He said, "Well, George wants you to just come and be his, you know, because you're his friend, and you know everybody on the crew. So if you come and just hang out and help keep the machinery rolling, I've got the guys that'll take care of all the union stuff, the paperwork and the time cards and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Just help George get from one moment to the next during the day." So that's what I did, and we had a great time.
Yeah,
and the movie was, I mean, Creepshow was just fucking great. And so when Day came around, he said, and then of course I did the music for him, and that's a whole different story. But he said, "Look, I got this little movie. We're going to do it in Well, actually, it wasn't little then. He sent me the same script that Greg read.
Right.
And I said, "Sure, I'll do it," and come back and do the same thing. And so it was really just being able to communicate. And because everybody knew everybody in Pittsburgh, it was a real interesting crew. There was a lot of laughs. There was a lot of ribbing and fun, and the Grips were always pulling pranks on everybody. And then, of course, there was Greg and Savini down in the shop with and all the stuff they were pulling.
So I got a quick story. I've told this before. So we had that shop in the mine, which though that whole complex, we used it for locations, and we had our offices there, and Greg and Tom's effect shop was there. And Tom, was sort of grew up in Pittsburgh, George's friend, sort of did things the way he did things, and not really. Not the way sort of the mechanics would work sort of in LA or whatever. So one day I went down to the shop, and there was a arm chop gag that they'd been working on, and it was sitting there, and he was showing it to me. And I said, so Tom, it's due on to shoot tomorrow. You'll test it before we go on set. And he went, no. He said, I'll test it when we get out on the set. And I'm thinking, well, that's going to be a problem. And I remember looking over Tom's shoulder at Greg, who went, don't worry about it. We'll get it done. It'll be figured out before you get to the set. So Greg already understood the process of, you got to test it before you get out on set with everybody standing around.
Well, I'll tell you the funniest thing about that gag was we had to shoot it twice. We had a couple arms, and we made the arm out of this material called Adrub, which was this urethane. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the first time that Lori hit the arm with the machete, it bounced off.
It bounced
off. So we were, because Tom and I had been friends for years up to that point. But I remember saying, like, Tom, is the thing gonna cut into it? And he's like, yeah, it's gonna be great. And then we did the first take, boing, and it bounced. And we were like, oh shit. So I remember we took the arm back to the studio. We cut a little wedge out of it, filled it with mortician's wax, and then brought it back to the set. So when Lori hit it, the machete would sink into the wax. But yeah, it bounced. I'll never forget that boing sound when it bounced.
Hey, Greg, didn't we do a reverse film gag on that? Like Lenny Lisa's head?
We did the reverse. And then we did the cutaway machete.
Right.
For that.
Oh, yeah, when she has to actually chop it.
She has to push through. And then we did the real machete with the stump and the fake arm that we pushed the arm away when they go in. And the funniest thing was there was one day I was in the workshop working, and they called me to set. I think someone came in. Who was your second, John? Was it Annie?
No, it was a woman named Katarina Wittich.
Katarina, that's right. Yeah. So she came, and Charles Carroll. Yeah. So she came into the shop, or Annie or somebody did. One of the PAs. And they need you on set right away. And I was like, oh shit, what's going on? I run to set, and everybody's standing around, and Tim DeLeo's on the ground, and George, you guys are all standing kind of looking really serious.
Like what are we doing?
A lot of times everyone would just sort of circle and so, and I have a picture of this actually in my photo album. So George goes, hey, so you're pre-med, right? And he said, yeah. And he goes, so when we cut the arm off, like, what do? We can cauterize it. And I said, yeah, but you got to tie a tourniquet first, or he'll just bleed to death. You got to. So weirdly enough, I became like the de facto medical consultant on the show, which led to the creation of K&B, which I can talk about later. But it was really funny because I get these calls like, you got to come to set. And I would come to set, and George would be like, okay, so you're the closest person we have to a doctor. So what should we do here? And I was like, we got to tie it off first. And then cut it.
And then you can cauterize it.
Then you can burn it. And then everyone's like standing around. Okay, good. Yeah, let's do that. So
and then we had to say, well, how are we going to burn it? Well, what about a torch?
That fucking blue flame. Do you remember that?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We used.
I mean, the fun part about that, and as an AD, it's a good thing I didn't know what I should have known. Because if anybody had said, well, look, what you're going to do is you're going to improvise a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And you say, well, no. We got to rehearse it. We got to practice. We got to do, because time is money and so forth and so on. But it was more fun because we would sit, as Greg would say, we'd all sit around going, well, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
And we'd figure it out. But it was a lot of fun to be collaborative with everybody on that.
Now, was that Steve? We had Steve Kershoff, who was our special effects guy. But
Yeah.
I remember, so when it came time to burn it, they used, what did they use on the torch that didn't burn like kerosene?
It was kerosene, wasn't it?
But it burned blue.
It burned blue. And
we were all, again, standing around scratching our heads going, why is it burning blue? It doesn't look right.
Shouldn't it be yellow or red?
It should be orange. And then Savini, and then we put on the stump, we put this, like, I think it was like Alka-Seltzer. We glued Alka-Seltzer to it and spritzed it with water. So when the torch,
it would smoke.
When the torch came away, it was bubbling.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so getting back to the whole AD thing, it was really just making it up as we went, but that's the way George loved to make films. I mean, he loved to. I remember when we were doing Night Riders, he came into the production office near the first day of shooting, and it was the first SAG movie he had ever made. And so, because of the union rules, we had to have things like call sheets and time sheets and day out of days. And so there was a lot of paperwork that went into this. And this was before Creep Show. And he walked into the production office where Zilla and my wife, who was a production coordinator at the time, and took a look. He said, what is all this stuff? He said, get rid of this stuff. Well, George, we got to know when people are supposed to show up. And he said, just tell everybody to be there at 7:00 and we'll figure it out. And he usually did. He usually knew how to do it. So,
yeah.
So, John, talk to me about the score, the kind of the Caribbean theme.
Well, that's sort of like what Greg was saying. I fell in love with the script that George sent, and because we'd worked together on Creep Show, he said, "Why don't you come up with some ideas?" And so I spent a little time. I was in LA by then, and I spent a little time coming up with some themes, and I temped out a whole sort of motif and theme pattern for what the show could be. And because it was set down in Florida or the Caribbean or a tropical location, I thought it would be kind of cool to kind of counterintuitively come up with a theme that would have those elements of it and then twist it as the movie went on. Well, then George calls a few months later. He and Ed have been down in Florida. He says, well, that script's gone. I said, well, what are we doing? Well, we're now making it in a mine. So, well, okay. So that Caribbean music, he said, no, man. No, man, I love that music. Don't change that music. I want that music. So that's really how it came to be. And so essentially he's playing with the perception of where the movie actually is. The movie is not set in Western Pennsylvania. The movie is set in Florida or in a southern area. Yeah. And even though we shot it up there, but then as you know, the movie, they come up from the underground and they're in a tropical area and they escape to the Caribbean. Yeah, in the helicopter. So I kept the music, and it was really controversial. I've been told more than once by many people that when the movie came out, people hated the score.
Really?
Yeah, they hated the score. They said, "What the hell is this? This is like this kind of Caribbean dance music or something like that." And it's like, where's the
for God's sake?
Yeah, steel drum. Where's the horror music? Where's the horror? And but now it's become this iconic thing. And like the movie was not well received when it came out either, but now it's a classic.
Yeah,
right. I think
I remember how we because George still wanted to keep that underground facility, but that tropical. So we did that. It was about a week and a half in Fort Myers, and we built a big platform on some big field. Yeah, that was supposed to be the elevator. And then all the zombies would come onto the elevator, or they came onto the elevator, and then the elevator was a Nike missile base in Monroeville, Pennsylvania. That the elevator didn't work. So I guess maybe it did. But anyway,
it did work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And then the zombies came off of the elevator in Monroeville and walked into the mine in Wampum. So they all tied together that
And invaded it.
Do you remember?
That's where we meet. That scene in Florida, Ed, that you're talking about, where you built the platform. That's where we meet Greg Nicotero's acting debut.
That's right.
He's up there in the camp.
I blame George for all that, because look, what happened was, again, going back to the original script, when we started prepping the movie, we were prepping from the original script.
Yeah.
So there was a scene where a soldier gets killed and his head comes back to life. And somehow or another, I was volunteered, against my will, probably, to be this zombie. Tom wanted to be the first zombie in the movie. So we cast Tom's head like right at the beginning of prep, and then we cast my head. So we were building a mechanical head of me so that they could do this gag in the middle of the movie where we realize that the doctor is feeding human flesh to the soldiers. And then the script got cut down, but we had already started building it. So George was like, well, we already spent the dough, as George would say. We already spent the dough on this, so let's just finish it. So he made me a character in the movie. And I had dialogue, and I was like, George, He's like,
It was a stunning perforance. I mean, when we finally get in there and see the head.
You know what? Fuck you, John. I still remember my dialogue. So I did something right. So it was me and Tasso. And then it was, Ralph Romero, Gary Clark, Tim DeLeo, Kellums.
Kellums.
And Amplis and Laurie and
well, there was Jarlath and those guys, the helicopter boy, the fly boys. But you guys there was you and Tasso up.
Me and Tasso hung out up top. We were like the two buddies.
That's it.
And then I had dialogue there, and then I had dialogue downstairs. And then
you got blasted when
I think the funniest story when I get killed is I have Phil Kellums gets bit in the neck, really great gag, and his machine gun goes off and shoots me. So Steve Kershaw comes in and riddles me with squibs. There's like 20 squibs, I think, like 10 on the front and 10 on the back. And I'm standing there with my outfit and my little red helmet, and I'm holding the post that has the zombie on it. And Nick Mastandrea, who was the key grip, who was a Romero staple for years and still, still part of the core family, walks up to me and says, hey, do me a favor. Don't fuck it up, because it's just going to cost us a ton of time and everyone's going to be really pissed. And I'm saying like this, and I go, what? And I hear John go, and action. Boom, 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 and all the squibs go off. So that's acting, John, because I really was like, Nick, what? And then all of a sudden,
we did that on purpose. I told Nick to go up and tell you that so that you would be completely distracted.
No, you didn't.
Now, one thing I've always wondered when people do effects of themselves, is it surreal to see your severed head just sitting on the table, moving around?
For me, it's not, because I'm there every step of the way. Like, I'm there for the head cast, I'm there for the sculpture, I'm there for the molds, I'm there for kind of all of that. So for me, I think because I'm part of the whole process, it's not quite the same for me as it would be. Like, I know, like when I would show people, like I had the head after we wrapped for a long time. And then Savini took it back and stripped the skin off and reused it for another movie, which is in a box right here, by the way. I still have my original head, but it's just the mechanism. It's not the skin anymore. But my mom was like fascinated. Like, I used to play pranks with people with it. It was fun.
Have you ever had an actor like be shown their head for the first time and like have a freak out?
Yeah, I did. I can't remember his name. There was a movie that we did. I have to look it up for Dark Horse called Dr. Giggles. And it was Manny Coto directed it. And there was an actor that we did a head cast of. And he really was really disturbed looking at his head. I have to find it, but he really wasn't Cliff DeYoung. But there was an actor that wouldn't refuse to come to set when the head was being shot because he didn't want to see it. There's a character who falls on a scalpel, and the scalpel pops out his throat. So we made a fake head of him for the scalpel to come through. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's freaky.
John, back to the score for a quick minute. Are you familiar with the band The Gorillaz?
Well, yeah, because they sampled it.
Right.
I mean, I didn't know them. But I get this call, and it's my agent saying, "Hey, look, there's this group in England, and they want to." No, it wasn't that. It was my lawyer called to say they want to get the rights. That's what it was. And I said, "Well, okay. I mean, who are they, and what do they want to do?" And for those of you who don't know that particular song, it's called M1A1. And what they did was they took the elements of the beginning of the score, which is that driving heartbeat, boom, 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 boom. And they also took Tim DeLeo's calls when he and Laurie are running around town seeing if anybody's there, and he's going, hello, hello. And they put it at the beginning of this song, which is basically the theme music from Day of the Dead, and expanded into one of the Gorilla songs. So I don't know anything about this. I said, sure, fine. We'll license it and they'll do it and whatever.
Right.
And then I told my kids, who were only like about 13 or 14, and they, what? You're doing a thing for the Gorillaz? And of course, then, okay, now I know, okay, they're this big rock group,
now it's relevant.
Yeah, now it's relevant. So,
real quick. So when you talk about with your kids, so years ago, somebody had given me a like a DVR type recorder. What was the first company that did that? Anyway, I had it sitting in a cupboard, and I didn't hook it up to the TV. And one day, Carl, my son, says, "We're gonna hook up that that DVR player and play some some DVDs." So we hook it up, and I didn't have any DVDs in the house. And then I remembered that at one of the conventions, at a NAPI convention, I bumped into Rubenstein. And he said, "Oh, I'll send you a nice quality copy of the DVD," because I only had like a little thing that probably recorded off the camera or something like that. And so, but the boys were like, I don't know, like 9 and 12 or something. I'm thinking, I don't know if this is the movie for them to see for the first time on a DVD. But we didn't have a choice. We popped it in. And what's interesting is my wife Felice did all the extra zombie casting. And the first thing that popped up was the interview that Tony Buba did when he did that little documentary about the movie. So there was like, oh, there's Mom. And then the next thing is the opening of the movie and the language and all that stuff. But,
well, it's kind of interesting when you have kids and you're in this business. It's what Greg was saying earlier about being there for the process and seeing his head and his face all the time. I've taken my kids to all the sets. And so they love the movies, but they're not frightened by them, and they're not turned off by them. They're not at all intimidated by them because they've watched how it's made, and they don't find it particularly scary. Greg, your kids must be like, I mean, taking them around K&B all the time.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter was terrified of butterflies when she was a kid because the horror stuff didn't bother her. But when she would see like the most normal mundane thing and be afraid of it. But I was like, oh yeah.
But not a chopped off head.
What was yours? Hold on, what?
But not a chopped off head.
No chopped off heads. And my son, who's now 22, just popped his head in and said he was terrified of Kermit the Frog. Like there was like giant werewolves and zombies and creatures all over the shop that they saw all the time. Like they were So yeah, you just have to redefine what scares you, I guess.
No, we're talking about recordings of the movie. Is there any chance or any rumors or anything of a 4K release?
I've never heard of one. The movie has changed ownership several times over the years.
Who
Sala,
actually owns it now? Do you know?
the Duddleson brothers, who coincidentally, were part of Greg's show, Creep Show. When George and Richard were partners, they made a deal with Sala for a 3-picture deal to begin with. Sala owned a film chain called United Artists. He was part of where he ran it.
United Film Distribution Company.
United Film Distribution was part of that.
Yeah. Right.
And so he made a deal to make with George and Richard to make these movies, Day of the Dead being one of them. Later on,
it was Creep Show, Day of the Dead, and there was another one. I thought there was
Night Riders.
Night Riders, that's right. It was a 3-picture deal.
But he sold Creep Show to Warner Brothers, so that took care of that. I don't know which, and that license, I guess, kind of expired and reverted. And then at one point, Sala had a relationship with the Duddleson brothers' father, I believe. And somehow, because of that relationship, I think they own a company called Troma. Was that the Duddlesons?
No,
Greg,
no, that was Kaufman.
They had some kind of distribution company, and so they ended up with the rights. So they now own it. They now control it. And I have never heard anything. I've never heard them talk about it. They've done other Day of the Dead incarnations.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I'm pretty tight with them because like again, they have the rights to all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I just think the appetite for it. If they were going to do 4K, it should have been done and available now because of the 40th anniversary.
You would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you talk about the film distribution was UFD, United Film Distributors. So when we were doing the T-shirts at the end, I had to put UFD on the shirts. I went, it looks like a fire department logo, which but they had to be there somewhere because that was the distribution company.
Yeah, those yellow sweatshirts.
Yeah, that's right. I wish I had a box of those painters' hats left over.
Oh yeah, the blue. There was a blue and gray with the logo. Yeah.
Well, it was a white painter's cap, and it said, "I was a zombie in Day of the Dead," because we gave them out to all the extras who came. Because we didn't pay them. We gave them $1 a day, a boxed lunch, and a hat. It said I was
and a signed newspaper by George.
Signed newspaper, signed by George. And I wish I had that box of those hats. I have no idea where it went.
I probably have one somewhere around here. I have the newspaper because when we shot the movie, I got one of the newspapers and I had all the actors sign it for me.
That's cool. I framed that.
So I have it framed on my wall somewhere. I don't know where the hell it is, but it's around.
A quick aside about the money and the business. So, with all the stuff that's going on in LA with the tax credit, and I'm involved in all that stuff. When I tell this story, when we had to shut down that town down in Fort Myers to do that opening sequence, I was in front of the town fathers or whatever you call them. And they're like, "What do you want to do? You can't do that. That's disruptive to our business." And I don't remember his name, but I was just a neophyte in those days. This film commissioner from Tallahassee flew into the meeting and he made a speech. And I still remember this. He said, "Why do we like the film business? We don't have to build them roads. We don't have to build them sewers. We don't have to build them schools. They just come into town. They spend millions of bucks. They sweep up after themselves and they leave. We love the film business." And these guys are like, "Okay, kid, what do you have to do?" And it's like, "Well, we're going to shut down the town center for 2 days." But just sort of emblematic of like, that's what, we spend a lot of money when we're in a town. And that's one of the good things about this business. But
and it was great because the way you set it up.
What?
Sorry, Jason, go ahead.
How many people come? Let's say how many people come to that town because it was filmed and used in the movie.
Yeah, it's definitely a tourist thing.
Yeah, that happened.
I mean,
Wilmington,
they really shut it down.
Yeah. When we did the Dawson's Creek in Wilmington, North Carolina, we did about 7 years there. And years later, the film commissioner said, "Yeah, people still come there on their vacation because they want to see where Dawson's Creek was filmed." And they spend money. They stay in hotels. They go to dinner. So
because of our schedule, George asked me to direct those opening scenes in the town because we had to run 2 units at the same time in order to make the schedule. because we only had, what did we have, Ed? A week and a half down there?
A week and a half, yeah.
Yeah. So I went and I took Zilla Clinton as my AD, and we had Ernie was the
Ernest Dickerson was the DP.
Ernest Dickerson was my cinematographer, and we shot all those scenes. We had one day to do that entire opening, not the stuff with A cast, because he was off with them and the helicopter and so forth. We were doing all the zombie stuff, all the stuff with the alligator coming out of the bank, and all of the zombies waking up. Oh, well, it was fantastic. We had these Wranglers. Greg's team, Greg and Tom's team, made the two Wranglers up as zombies, and they were big, fat guys.
Yeah.
And they brought this huge alligator on the back of their truck. And I said, all right, well, what we want to do is we want to put the whole scene, as you recall, is Laurie and Tim DeLeo calling out to see if anybody's still alive, and the noise wakes all the zombies up. And so as they're doing this, there's this crocodile or alligator sitting on the steps of the bank, and I want two zombies to walk out and trip over the thing. And can we do this safely? I mean, I don't want the gator to attack you. They said, nah, these things are really slow, and we've fed them, and he's basically just going to sleep if he's in the middle of the sun. So they put him out there, and they came out and they stepped all over this thing and tripped, and he made a few moves, and that wasn't the funny part. The shot was great, and it looks great in the movie, but getting him in and out of the truck was what was really great, because they had to physically, and they had some friends, they had to lift him up and bring him out. They had to wrap his mouth, bring him and put him on the ground. And so the first time they're doing it, we're getting ready to set up. All of a sudden there's a whoa, 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 whoa. And all of a sudden I look up, and this guy goes flying by me. And the gator had gotten completely pissed off and it whipped him with his tail and knocked him like half a block down the street. And they dropped the poor thing, and it hit its nose. So if you look closely, you'll see that the gator has a bloody nose in the shot.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I noticed that it looked a little beat up. So was that supposed, that was meant to be like a zombie gator?
Yeah, no animals were really harmed, but
we definitely did not do. Yeah, and we definitely did not do makeup on the zombie, or I mean on the alligator.
On the alligator.
It's funny, John, because we were churning out so many zombies.
Oh.
Our team, we never really even made it to set. I don't think we left our lockup area, because we would make up zombies and then the wave would go to the wave.
We had hundreds of them, I
know. So I have no recollection of being on the street when we did that, unless there was a separate, maybe there was some zombies.
Well, Dr. Tongue.
Yeah, no, that was at the end of the day, though, because I remember
we needed to put him against the sun. Yeah,
we needed the sun to be there, because we were all at the hotel fucking around, and then you called and you're like, "Come on, we gotta go. The sun's going down," and we rushed to the location and put the zombie in front of the sun. That I remember.
Great shot.
I could not believe.
But George was there for that.
Yes, he was there for that.
Yeah.
Because that was Bub.
Yeah, I could not believe that was an animatronic. I was blown away.
Well, the funny thing about that was because Tom was insistent on being the first zombie in the movie. So we did a head cast of him, and then we started building the mechanics. And then at some point he was like, he put one of the appliances on the head, and then he was like, "Oh, I think we want to do it so that it looked like it got shot in the face." So then then he took a drill and he started drilling holes in it and cutting it apart. And I'll never forget the way Tom's brain worked. He'd come up with an idea and he'd just sit there and start. At one point, we had the foam latex skin was on the head, and he was drilling holes into the underskull to make it look like it was buckshot. And he hit it, and the foam skin caught and ripped. The whole thing wrapped around the drill. and we all just were. So that that animatronic, yeah, it just had the jaw. That then there was a tongue, and the joke was this was back when foam latex was like everything was made out of foam latex, but silicone people were just starting to come into making prosthetic things out of silicone. So we made the tongue out of silicone because we wanted it to be heavy. But it never cured completely. So if you touched it, it was really sticky. So when you look at that, the tongue is literally hanging out of the mouth because it was really heavy. And then the eye mechanism was just a little side to side. And then it had a little bit of a brow. I had that for years. And then I gave it to Kirk Hammett from Metallica, now owns that part.
Of course he does.
Which I need. I was texting. We recreated it for Walking Dead. So we rebuilt a Dr. Tongue puppet.
But that was that whole day of shooting with both crews was a real tribute to the city that they allowed us to have such control. I mean, it was really run and gun, and we were all around, and we had hundreds of extras. Ed, I don't know how you and Felice and Zilla put all those people together, and then Greg and Tom churned them out. But there's that one big shot that we did from the roof looking down on the street where they're all
like, yeah. Do you remember we had to figure out, well, there were two issues with the zombies we had to figure out. One was so many of them.
Yeah.
So we created foreground zombies, midground zombies.
Because we split it into two. We split it into there were three. We split into three. There was the hero zombies that we did.
Right.
And then we ended up hiring a bunch of local makeup people and costumers, like the costume people would come in, and we'd do oatmeal. We'd mix latex and oatmeal and paint everybody's faces blue.
Right.
And then we had 150 masks.
Yeah. We found this place that made masks. We had 5 different looks. So the 3 different looks, and we'd stick them on the way in the background. So if you really, 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 really study it, you could probably see that the ones way in the back, because otherwise we would never have been able to handle that many zombies in any given day. And the other thing is, remember the continuity zombies.
Yeah.
So the other thing we needed to do, because we shot coming onto that pad in Florida, coming down the elevator in Monroeville, coming out in the mine. So, and we couldn't afford to take extras from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, you were one of those zombies.
I was one of them. I'm the one with my arm in a sling. Zilla Clinton was the bride zombie. She's the bride.
Tassa was one. As a matter of fact, I have a photo here, which is kind of funny. This is the photo from Florida. And there's a zombie right in the middle that is the one that Ed played in Pittsburgh, but that's not you. When we were in Florida, it was somebody else. But like we had Tasso who had the motorcycle helmet on,
right?
Because he was the one that ripped Joe Pilato's guts out,
right? But Zilla and I were the ones. We were in Monroeville and in the mines, so we just said to George, make sure that the continuity zombies get a close up as you go by, and then you can have any other ones you want. And hopefully in the audience's mind, they'll go, oh, that was the same
ones. That's right. Yeah. That's what we did.
Yeah.
I remember you coming in the door. I think when Gary Clark gets killed, I think there's that big close-up of you.
Of me.
Yeah.
Coming in.
Yeah.
It on set. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about.
I had it in my office for years. And she was the bride zombie. I was the arm sling.
Yeah. So, cool.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is the photo. If you look at that, this is a famous photo of George from set. All the zombies around him are all wearing masks.
Yeah.
Drives me crazy because the problem with the masks was the masks didn't look anything like any of the makeups.
No.
So when you saw
I guess that must have been a last minute photo.
It was shot at the Nike base.
That was shot in the missile silo.
Yeah, and it was at the end of the day, and the publicity. That may have been a day that Richard had done a press thing.
Maybe.
And so
it was.
And the interesting thing about that day,
I think you're right. I think it was.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that day was we did all those shots at the Nike base, and there was some area down at the bottom which we needed for the up shots. and a C-stand blew off. It was and came down and hit one of the zombies on the head and knocked him out.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was like, we got to. And so we got the meds on the scene and sent him to the hospital. And as soon as the shoot was over, George went over to the hospital to see him, make sure he was all right.
Yeah.
That was his biggest thrill. You know, he got a personal visit from the director.
He had a mask on.
He had a mask. That probably saved his head.
And by the way, that's his big claim to fame. That guy still to this day is like, I'm the guy.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
There are a lot of them out there.
Yeah, I just remember because we were trying to figure out, police were trying to figure out how to get so many zombies, and there was no internet, whatever, and the word got out, and literally, I remember carloads of like college kids would drive from like Chicago or Boston, and they would sleep in their car just to come out here and be a zombie and get that hat and be in the movie, and the fan.
The Nitty Gritty Dirt Band drove down from Boston.
Really?
To be zombies in the show. The dean of students at Carnegie Mellon University drove out and was a zombie. You can see him. He's in the big attack at the end. He's one of the lead zombies that are coming towards the door where Pilato is running away.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I had my friends from high school came out and they were zombies. So, it was kind of like, oh, hey, do you want to be a zombie? And
yeah.
But it was interesting too, because I would jump back and forth between Tom's crew and the background zombie makeup crew, because we ended up, oh my God, it's so funny. I can't believe I forgot about this. We would use streaks and tips to paint their hands because we needed, we didn't have time, we didn't have a million makeup people, like we do now. So we had brown, we had like tan, blue, and gray, and there would be like assembly lines. So I'm telling you, to this day, anytime somebody sprays streaks and tips behind me or around, I'm instantly back in that mind. It takes me right there again.
Now, tell me more about Captain Rhodes' death. Like, how it was conceived, how it was executed, what challenges. That's by far that's like the iconic kill from the movie.
Well, there's a very famous story about our guts from that, from that moment. And of course, Ed and John are laughing now, but at the time, I was tasked with going to a butcher shop and buying entrails. So you couldn't use a cow because they were too big. So we used pig entrails. And my dad's a physician, so I would call him and say, Dad, what do we do? How do we clean the guts? And he said, well, just soak them in bleach and clean them, and that'll kill all the bacteria. Great. So we got the guts, we cleaned them, and we used them for when Tim DeLeo did the gut spill in the dream, when he would roll over and the guts would fall out. And then when Mike Tersick played the zombie that gets drilled in the forehead with the Dremel, he sat up on the table and the guts spilled out. Those were shot earlier in the production. Then we just kept the guts in the refrigerator in a bucket. Like, why we didn't just throw them out or get new? I have no fucking idea. I was a kid. Tom didn't. Nobody. We just didn't think about it. So then we go to Florida to shoot, and we come back after Christmas. And what we didn't realize is that when the facility was closed over the holidays, they turned all the power off. So we came back like January 2nd or 3rd. And I'll never forget walking through the hallway, and I'm like, what is that smell? That's really bad. And the closer we got to our workshop, the worse the smell got. And then we realized that the power to the refrigerator that was storing the guts had been turned off for weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks. Ugh. And the Rhodes thing was coming up like in 2 days. Like, it was kind of like, well, fuck, we're killing Rhodes. Like, we got to. So for some reason, we didn't buy new ones. We just took the old ones and we put them into a sink and we poured bleach on them again. And by the way, they foamed up. There was so much foam coming from the guts. I'm surprised we didn't poison ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean me. So and then Cletus had built a fake floor, and we had made a cast of Joe on a slant board with a chest piece, and then that chest piece blended off to him, and then his real legs and went underneath the floor, and we put fake legs. So we had to put it all together in position because we couldn't glue it on Joe and then walk in. So we were there for about 2.5 hours before everybody else was there. And then we get there, I have pictures of all this stuff. And then we get it all glued on. We had to rig the costumes. We had to bring the fake legs in and put all the guts. So of course they bring the cameras in. Cameras all get set up, and then it comes time to bring the guts in. And as soon as we brought the guts in, like they still smelled because they were fucking rancid. Everybody was like, "Oh, what the hell?" And we're like, "Sorry." So we start loading it up. Tasso, who was one of the matching continuity zombies, put earplugs up his nose so that he couldn't smell. So we did it, and then if you watch the behind the scenes, the one thing I will forever be grateful for Tom about was that he documented everything. He learned from Dick Smith that you take photos and video, anything you do, you document it. So I was the guy filming everything. So when we shot that scene, we had the camera on a tripod off to the side. And when they yell cut, you can see everybody doing this, trying to wave, because Joe was the only person that couldn't walk off the set when it smelled bad because he was stuck in the fake floor.
And I remember you used some kind of, was it cinnamon or peppermint or something? You would put menthol, yeah. And he was gagging. I mean, it's a miracle he didn't blow lunch the whole time, because he had to sit there for a couple of hours.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fortunately, the end of it, we didn't put the guts in until right when we were ready to go. But yeah, it was rough. But it was a memorable thing. I mean, that's the thing about the way George and the way Tom worked, was that Tom always wanted to top himself. He never wanted to do anything twice. If we had done it in another movie, we would never do it again unless it was bigger and better. And George really sort of gave him that freedom. Like Tom would say, "We're going to do this, this, and this," and okay, great. And then George would just sort of let him go off and build it. The whole sequence, when we called it, and I think it was either in the script, I know it was on the call sheets, called "Laugh in the Dark."
Oh, yeah.
All the zombies run off, or the characters run off into the mine, and it was like going into a haunted house. So George wanted it to be anywhere you show up, boom, the zombies would pop up, boom, and they would shoot them. And we had like a fucking little mechanical bat on strings that we were pulling across, and a lot of those gags, like the shovel, where the head was chopped off with the shovel. A lot of those things were just kind of like, George was like, "What do you guys want to do?" I don't remember, honestly, if that shovel gag was in the script or we pitched it. And then I
don't know that it was, but it was very much like that. What do you guys want to do? And Tom and you would come up with these ideas, and it sounded great.
And we came up with them early. We had to come up with them early because it took time to build them.
That took time to build them. Wouldn't you say, Greg, that I don't know whether this is apocryphal or not, but it seems to me that movie was like, everybody sort of acknowledges it as one of Tom's masterpieces, but wasn't that kind of like a quantum leap in that kind of makeup effect? Isn't it acknowledged as a kind of a real milestone?
Yeah, because when Dawn of the Dead was made, and it was 77, 78.
Right.
Makeup effects. That Dawn of the Dead really was one of the movies that sort of pushed makeup effects into the forefront, into the spotlight. And then if you look at all the movies that were made in between, American Werewolf in London and The Howling and The Thing and all these, like 81, 82 were probably the biggest years for genre filmmaking, without a doubt. So I always looked at Day of the Dead as sort of being, like the pinnacle of everything that had started with Dawn and came through to Day of the Dead. Tom hired people from Hollywood, which was, I think, the first time he had ever really done that. It was the first time he had a real crew. Like before, before that, Tom had, on Friday the 13th, it was Tasso. On Dawn of the Dead, it was like Jeannie Jeffries and a couple makeup people. Tom really never had a whole dedicated crew. And, one of the reasons that I found myself so instrumental was that Tom hadn't worked with a crew like that before. So between Ed and Richard and David Ball, they were like, look, your job here is to keep Tom focused. Let Tom be concentrating on coming up with the gags, but he needs someone to manage the department. Right. So I was the guy who ordered all the supplies and ordered all the materials and got all the resumes and put people in front of him to hire. And then, so I was, I was like his assistant, and that was a position up until that point that really never existed, especially for Tom, because Tom never had that kind of crew before. Yeah. So if things came up, a lot of times, John, you would call me to set, or George would call me to set, and they would be like, hey, we need this, this, this. And then I would go back to the room and tell the guys and tell Tom, okay, they need 6 zombies here. Like I would break down the scripts and be like, okay, we need 8 hero zombies. We need 12 background zombies. And that's when I worked with Felicia and all the background.
Jim Brolhide and
yeah. So I was sort of the conduit for Tom, and the goal really was, Tom's brilliant at what he does. Let's make sure that he has the tools to execute everything to the highest quality and expectation. And that was kind of, look, that started my career, and that's, what I do, what I've done.
You brought up an interesting thing that I'd like to ask Ed about, and Ed, you can tell us as much as you want to, but as and in terms of the improvisational way that, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I mean that in a really positive way, that George made movies. There was a script and there was a plan, and we all knew what we were, and we were all professionals. We knew what we had to do. But there was a lot of what Greg was just talking about. Well, we need, because every movie is like this. You get on the set and you're making it up as you go. I mean, the script says one thing, but you have to look at the environment you're in and the resources that you have. So what happened and so it was changing a lot. Yeah. What happened in production? I mean, how did you mange the money? I mean, we had a limited amount of money, and we were always throwing things at you guys, saying, "Well, that's not what." Yeah, I know that's what we said we were going to do, but now we're going to do this.
Yeah. No, and part of it was those were the early days for all of us. I mean, that was part of the fun, like Greg's talking about. You had to make stuff up and see if you could make it work. I hadn't had a lot of higher level professional experience yet out here either. I'd done smaller productions and stuff. And so, what was great about it is that the whole crew of people were good-hearted people who just wanted to do a great job. They didn't have, sort of no assholes or very few.
Yeah. There was one.
Okay.
Yeah, we isolated them.
Yeah. But so it was just a matter of looking at the situation going, okay, how are we going to pull that off? And collaboratively, I think everybody figured it out. Zilla was a production manager. I did budgets all summer long, so I kind of knew what we had to spend where. And, as long as you have the framework of stuff and the time, you work within it. I mean, one thing, though, and I still don't remember how we managed to do this, because we did finish the movie on budget, I do believe. But I had built the schedule so that Florida was going to be the end of the movie, because I thought
that's right.
Carrot. Because after all these months in this mine, in this darkness, in this dust, let's have the little, we have a prize at the end of the hall here, which is a week and a half in Florida, but we didn't make it.
No.
But I couldn't push Florida, because after the first of the year, we would be in the holiday season, and the deal I had on all the condos, because we basically rented a bunch of condos for everybody to be in, they would all be gone. People would be using them for holiday trips and stuff because that was the high season after the holidays. So I had to keep Florida where it was. And so we did that in December, and then we finished. We went into the holiday break, and then we came back. So
how many days were we in the mine after that?
I think it was like a week or 2
weeks.
It was about 2 weeks. So obviously, I must have been far enough under budget come Christmas that we were able to do that.
Well, that was my question, though. So internally, were you able to move money around then? I mean,
I guess. I mean, that's what you do in production. I guess when we saw it coming that we weren't going to make it, we started figuring out, Zill and I probably started figuring out how we're going to do this. I don't remember the specifics, but we did. But I will say one thing about walking into that mine. If you remember, there was a parking lot outside, and then with these glass doors, and there was this long hallway that sort of went down. And then at the end, you open up doors, and there was a street right there. And across the street was where the complex was. It was a cement factory. I think it was Portland Cement, because they owned it, and they mined all that limestone to make cement. And I just remember after Christmas, opening up those doors and starting walking down that hallway thinking, it's the hardest thing in the world to walk into that goddamn mine, because I felt like we're walking into prison. I thought, this is because the idea was the end was going to be the payoff, for the crew was going to be in Florida, and have to walk into that mine again in January was the hardest thing to do.
I know it was we did a couple reshoots, because I know we reshot the scene with Tim DeLeo. We reshot the gut spill for sure. I remember that, which is one of the things that we did in January. I'll have to look. I have all the call sheets. I will just have to go look.
Yeah. I haven't looked at them in a long time. But it was, I remember, because I was in charge of the call sheets and the schedule. And I remember we used to do boards. Ed did the first board for the movie. And a board back then was not on a computer. It was literally a strip board. Remember those?
Yeah.
And you had a strip for every day, and it had all the elements of the film in a strip. And you would move them around constantly as you were creating a schedule. And I remember when I came on, I took Ed's board, and with certain changes that they made, we revised the board a little bit. And I would go back into my little office at the end of every day and turn strips upside down, which is what you did to indicate that they were finished.
You got the scenes.
And I remember Richard Rubenstein came down, and we made the schedule. We made the board on the first week. He came in and he was looking at the board, and he said, "Oh, this is really great." That was the last time it ever happened. After that, strips were flying all over the place, and some of them were turned upside down, and some of them were just like pushed off to the side.
One quick note about George was a sweetheart, obviously, to work with. He was great. But people used to say, sometimes he'll get mad at you that something wasn't done because he thought he told you, and why didn't you do it? So one day we were in one of those sets back in the mine, and we had finished the scene, and everybody cleared out. And I was the last one at the door, and George was there. And he was walking around, and he was saying, "Oh, there's going to do this." And I went, aha. He said it, didn't realize that nobody else was there. And in his mind, I said it. Why didn't people do it? That's what it takes. He
was talking to himself.
Well, yeah, he just, it came out of his mouth. So he figured, okay, this is what we're doing, but nobody else heard it.
So before we wrap up, why don't you share any more Romero stories or memories?
Well, who wants to go first? I mean, there are a million of them.
Yeah, I know. You got better than I do. I just had that one time, and all I just remember is he was just a sweetheart to work with. He had such a great heart, and it was a pleasure. Because again, when schedules would change and things would go out the window, when you might normally go, so George was like, "Okay, fine, let's just figure it out," Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember about working with him as well. I mean, the other thing is we were all friends outside of the business. So we would hang all the time and talk about movies and drink scotch and get polluted and have, a lot of fun. So that carried over onto the set. I mean, George was not a screamer. He hated tension in that regard. And because everybody knew each other, it was really a lot of fun. And that's what I remember about it. Even being down in that mine all that time.
Yeah.
I mean, we had people like Nick Mastandria and Nick Tallow and people who were completely wacko and really wanted to have fun and would do pretty much anything to have fun. And then, as I said earlier, you'd have Greg and Tom and didn't you guys build a ramp so that you could jump the go-kart, the cart at one point?
Yeah. Look, I mean, the funny thing about our crew, Tom was 40-ish because he lies about his age, and I was most of the rest of the people on his crew were 20 years younger. We were all Everett was 18 or 19. And I think Dave Kinlan was maybe 21. Volich was 20. Mike Tursick was 19. Howard was 19. We were all 19, 20-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing about it was we all worshiped George. We all worshiped Tom. So every day was like Christmas for us. We got to go to work. And not only were we going to work, we were working on the sequel to Dawn of the Dead, which is the greatest zombie movie ever made in our minds at the time. So to be able to, and again, because I grew up in Pittsburgh and the pedigree of Night of the Living Dead and the Crazies and Dawn of the Dead, like it was, I don't know how you can express the sheer joy that we all had going to work every day. Fangoria magazine was huge, and Tom was in Fangoria magazine every month. And we were now working for a guy who we read about on the newsstand. It's not like now where you can find anything and everything you want at the stroke of, a backslash or an enter. You had to work for it and you had to fight for this stuff. So being able for us to be able to be part of that experience, we were giddy every single day we went to work. We were in awe. It was in that sort of pinch me, how the fuck did we get here kind of phase. So it was great. It was still one of the greatest experiences that I ever had. And the fact that my relationship with George and with Chris Romero at the time really led to the creation of my company, which is still in existence after 35 years. I remember coming to LA. We had a meeting for a movie at Disney that Deborah Hill was producing called Gross Anatomy. And it was about medical school students autopsying cadavers and the trials and tribulations. So this was 1980, 88, 89. And went into the meeting at Disney, and Deborah was there. And Deborah said, George Romero and Chris Romero said that you were pre-med. And I said, yeah, I was studying medicine, and then I, strayed off my path. George always used to make jokes. You should have been a fucking doctor. I don't know what the hell you're doing in this. Why the fuck? And he felt bad. Like a couple times I remember we'd be having drinks and he'd be like, I feel bad. I derailed your medical career. Like, George, trust me. I think I'd much rather be taking the fake kidneys out than the real kidneys. So this is fine. So one of the reasons that we got that job, Gross Anatomy, was because George and Chris had recommended me to Deborah Hill. And then the next job after that was Dances with Wolves, which we got in part because they saw the cadavers that we had done and they went, wow, this looks really real. The realism and so, it was all, George really had a hand in sort of helping me make the transition from Pittsburgh to California and then owning my own studio.
And that was the thing about George. He loved working with people. He was not a dictatorial director. He would take ideas from anybody, and he liked the collaborative. He liked the talking about it. He liked the thing that Greg was saying earlier, where we were all just sort of sitting around looking at the shot like, what do we do? He loved that.
Yeah, he did.
And he made everybody feel it didn't matter whether you were 19 or whether you were a veteran. He made you feel like, well, we're all doing this together, guys. So everybody's got, great ideas. Let's hear them.
Hey, Jason, when's this is this going live? It's not going live now, is it? Or is it?
No, I'm thinking either Wednesday or Thursday.
All right. Will you let us know?
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's do a quick wrap up.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, Greg, Ed, John, thank you so much for joining us. John, I believe you had a book come out recently. Do you want to talk about that very briefly?
Yeah, my latest book is called Residue. It's about monsters, but a very different kind of monster. So I won't say too much more than that. It's you can, if you go on to any of my social media stuff, you can find stuff about it. I'm really happy with it. It got great reviews, and
It's great. It's great, by the way.
and yeah, thank you. And we'll see. The publishing business, like the movie business, is really tough. Hard to make any money, but that's not why I do it anyway. I get bored easily, so this is another avenue. It's called Residue. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, blah blah blah.
Great. Greg, anything you want to plug real quick?
Yeah, actually, we just wrapped season 2 of Fallout.
I love season 1, by the way. It was excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
Roggins is great.
Yeah, Walt's amazing. So we're starting season 4 of Daryl Dixon. We start shooting in Madrid over the summer. Dead City is airing on AMC now, and I just finished shooting a reality competition show / horror movie called Guts and Glory, which is going to air in September. And basically, if I liken it to if Survivor and the Blair Witch Project had a baby. So these people signed up for a competition show not knowing that they're going to be killed off each episode. So it's really experimental. It's really wild. I'm editing now and in post. It's a ton of fun and really wild. And what else? Working on Cape Fear with
what's that going to be? Greg, what's that show going to be on?
It's going to be on AMC and Shudder.
Okay, great. That's the first I've heard of it. So I'm very interested. We should talk about that.
Really, yeah, it's going to be great.
All right, Ed, anything you want to promote? Or
no, you probably know I retired at the end of last year after.
Congratulations.
30. Thank you. After 36 years, I thought I'd share the pain with somebody else for a while, and basically been spending my time. I've volunteered for the the coalition, the production coalition here in California, try to see if we can increase the tax credits here so we can get some work back to the Southern California area. Because a lot of crews have been devastated with what's going on. So I've been spending some time on that. Anyway.
Okay.
And John and I still teach our class in the fall at Carnegie Mellon. We'll be back at that in a couple months.
Very cool. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone for listening. I'd really appreciate if everyone would give us a rating and review on iTunes, a rating on Spotify, like and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us at Dads from the Crypt Talk on TikTok.
Yay.
And with that, I thank you for listening to Dads from the
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.